Long before Britain became a nation of railways, factories, and streetlights, there was a town on its northern edge where winter did not simply bring cold. It brought silence. Each year, as the days shortened and the sun sank lower in the sky, people vanished. Not one or two, dozens, sometimes entire families. And when spring arrived, the town remained, but those people never returned. This was not legend born centuries later. It was recorded, not in folklore alone, but in parish rolls, tax records, church burial books, and letters written by men who could not explain what they were witnessing. A town that lost its people every winter, year after year, until its name itself faded from maps. The town stood in what is now northern England, near the borderlands where Roman roads once cut through forests, and later kingdoms rose and fell. In medieval times, it was known as Ravenscroft, a modest settlement surrounded by moorland, dense woodland, and peat bogs that seemed to swallow sound. It was not large, but it was prosperous enough. Shepherds grazed flocks, traders passed through, a stone church stood at its center. Life followed the seasons, as it did everywhere else, until winter came. The first records appear in the late 1200s. A parish ledger notes something unusual. Tithes were unpaid not because of poverty, but because the contributors were absent beyond reckoning. The priest who wrote the entry did not accuse them of fleeing. He did not list deaths. He simply recorded absence. At first, the disappearances were small. A shepherd gone, a woodcutter missing, men who failed to return from the hills. This was not unheard of in medieval Britain. The land was harsh and accidents were common. But Ravenscroft did not follow the pattern of accidents. Bodies were not found. Belongings were left behind. Fires burned out in hearths. Doors were found unbarred. Then the disappearances grew. By the early 1300s, entire households vanished during winter months. Church benches once filled stood empty. Names were crossed out of records without explanation. In some years, nearly a third of the town was gone by spring. There were no signs of attack, no reports of raiders, no evidence of plague during the early years. Livestock remained. Crops were untouched. The town itself was intact, as if the people had simply dissolved into the cold. Rumors spread quickly. Some blamed wolves. Others whispered of spirits in the moor. A few claimed the land itself was cursed, but none of these explanations matched what witnesses described. The disappearances followed a pattern. They began after the first deep frost. They peaked during the darkest weeks of winter. They stopped abruptly with a thaw. Survivors described hearing sounds at night. Not screams, not battle, low humming like wind moving through hollow ground. Others spoke of lights on the moor, pale and distant, moving slowly before vanishing. These accounts were dismissed by outsiders, but they appeared again and again in local testimony. One letter, written in 1317 by a visiting tax official, survives in fragments. He wrote that Ravenscroft was a place of great unease, where the living wait for the night as if expecting judgment. He noted that villagers slept in groups during winter, barricading doors not against men, but against something unnamed. Despite fear, people did not abandon the town. Land tied families to place. Leaving meant starvation elsewhere, and so they stayed, hoping each winter would be the last. It never was. By the mid-1300s, the Black Death swept across Britain. Plague devastated cities and villages alike. Ravenscroft was affected, but strangely, the plague did not explain its losses. Parish records show winters where disappearances continued even when plague deaths were low. In some years, more people vanished in winter than died of disease. This made Ravenscroft an anomaly. Royal clerks took notice. A brief inquiry was conducted, but it produced no conclusions. Officials recorded that the town was ill-fated and moved on. The disappearances changed the social fabric. Marriages declined. Children were fewer. Survivors became inward, suspicious, deeply religious. The church added winter vigils. Bells were rung at night. Prayers were said not for the dead, but for the missing. One winter, according to a later account preserved in a monastic chronicle, a group of men followed tracks in the snow leading away from the town. The tracks did not scatter, they moved together toward the moor. Then they ended abruptly, as if the walkers had stepped into air. No bodies were found, no blood, no signs of struggle. By the 1400s, Ravenscroft had become known beyond its region. Travelers avoided it in winter. Maps marked it faintly, sometimes with notes indicating danger or abandonment. Yet it remained inhabited, stubbornly alive. Then the pattern shifted. In the late 1400s, winters became harsher. The Little Ice Age tightened its grip on Britain. Cold deepened. Snow lasted longer. And one winter, Ravenscroft lost nearly everyone. Records from a nearby monastery state that messengers sent to the town in spring found buildings standing, tools rusting where they were dropped, animals wandering unattended, and no human presence. Fires had been lit and left to die. Food remained stored. It was as if the town had been paused. No mass grave was found. No evidence of evacuation. The people were gone. After that winter, Ravenscroft never recovered. A few settlers attempted to return later. They left before the next winter. By the early 1500s, the town was no longer listed as inhabited. Its lands were absorbed into neighboring estates. Its name faded. Yet the disappearances did not fade completely. Centuries later, antiquarians studying medieval records noticed inconsistencies, tax rolls that dropped sharply each winter, church books with names erased and never replaced. The pattern was too precise to ignore. Modern historians proposed explanations. Some suggested seasonal migration gone wrong. Others proposed carbon monoxide poisoning from enclosed winter homes. A few blamed harsh winters causing unrecorded deaths. But none of these explanations fit all the evidence. Carbon monoxide would leave bodies. Migration would leave trails and destinations. Starvation would affect livestock. None of this occurred. Archaeological surveys of the area revealed something unsettling. Beneath the moorland near the former town were vast peat bogs, deeper than expected, layered over centuries. Bogs are known to preserve bodies. Yet extensive searches found almost none dating to Ravenscroft's final years. Ground-penetrating studies revealed cavities beneath the earth, collapsed spaces where land had given way over time, sinkholes formed by freezing and thawing cycles. In winter, these could open silently beneath snow. Some researchers believe the town was slowly consumed by the land itself, that winter frost weakened the ground, that people walking together at night fell into hidden collapses, that bogs swallowed them whole. But even this explanation fails to account for scale, or for the absence of remains. Another theory points to social collapse, that fear drove mass flight during winter, people leaving together and dying elsewhere. Yet no records show an influx of refugees. No neighboring towns reported sudden arrivals. The final explanation is the most uncomfortable. That Ravenscroft existed at the edge of human understanding, that its geography, climate, and isolation created conditions where disappearance was not an exception but a seasonal certainty, a place where winter erased people quietly and completely. Today, Ravenscroft does not appear on modern maps. Its exact location is debated. Locals still avoid parts of the moor in winter. Shepherds speak of ground that shifts beneath snow, of sounds carried strangely by the wind. No sign marks where the town once stood. Only records remain. And the pattern they reveal is simple and terrifying. Every winter, people disappeared, and no one ever found them. When the town vanished from maps, it did not vanish from memory. Nearby villages continued to reference it in boundary disputes and land grants, always with caution. Legal documents from the 16th century describe parcels of land as lying west of the old winter town, or beyond the place where folk no longer dwell. The phrasing is telling. Ravenscroft was not remembered as abandoned or destroyed. It was remembered as a place people no longer stayed. Oral accounts collected centuries later reveal that fear outlived the town itself. Shepherd families passed down warnings to their children: never cross the moor after the first frost, never follow lights in winter, never sleep on ground that hums beneath snow. These were not moral lessons, they were survival rules. In the 17th century, during England's age of rational inquiry, scholars attempted to catalog vanished settlements. Ravenscroft appeared repeatedly, always with annotations expressing confusion. One antiquarian wrote that the town seems to have been undone not by war, pestilence, nor famine, but by something that left no mark but absence. That sentence would be quoted again and again in later studies. Excavations began in the 18th century, crude by modern standards. Foundations were uncovered, hearths, broken pottery, everyday objects left exactly where they had been used. There was no sign of panic, no weapons scattered, no mass burial pits. What was missing stood out more than what was found. Human remains were almost entirely absent. This contradicted centuries of habitation. Even in peaceful settlements, deaths occur, bones accumulate, cemeteries grow. Ravenscroft's burial ground was small and strangely underused. Records suggest many deaths were never recorded as deaths at all. People were simply marked missing. This linguistic detail matters. Medieval scribes were precise when death was known. Even plague victims were counted. Ravenscroft's records avoided the word absent, gone, not returned. In the 19th century, geology entered the conversation. Scientists studying peat bogs and moorland behavior noted that winter conditions could be uniquely dangerous. Freeze-thaw cycles create deceptive surfaces. Snow hides weakness. Ground collapses without warning. In rare cases, entire sections can give way silently. Yet these explanations, while plausible, fail to satisfy one detail repeated in accounts. The disappearances were not random, they followed the same seasonal rhythm, and they did not affect everyone equally. Those who survived longest tended to be the elderly, the very young, or the infirm. Able-bodied adults vanished at higher rates. Entire working-age populations thinned each winter. This pattern suggests movement. People were not dying in their sleep, they were leaving their homes. Why? One answer lies in climate history. During the late medieval period, winters grew longer and darker. Fuel shortages became severe. Food stores dwindled. In isolated towns, survival sometimes required risky decisions. Groups may have attempted winter journeys for resources, aid, or relocation. But Ravenscroft's winter journeys never ended anywhere else. No trade town reported seasonal arrivals. No monasteries recorded sudden influxes. No burial sites appeared along known routes. It was as if the traveler stepped out of the world. The 20th century brought new tools and new theories. Aerial surveys revealed subtle patterns in the moor, circular depressions, linear voids beneath the surface, features consistent with ancient subsidence zones, areas where land collapses repeatedly over centuries. Ground-penetrating radar detected anomalies too deep and unstable to excavate safely. These voids could swallow people without leaving surface disruption, especially under snow. Yet one question remains unanswered. Why winter? Why did Ravenscroft survive summers intact, only to lose people with mechanical regularity every cold season? Some researchers propose a convergence of factors. Winter darkness reduced visibility. Snow masked danger. Hunger forced movement. Cold altered the land structure. Fear accelerated bad decisions. In such conditions, disappearance becomes systematic. Others reject purely physical explanations. They point to the psychological impact of isolation. Long winters induce collective anxiety. Stories amplify fear. Expectation shapes behavior. When a community believes winter will take people, behavior changes. Risk tolerance drops. Panic spreads. Groups move together, increasing the chance of mass loss. This explanation does not deny the physical dangers, it multiplies them. Ravenscroft may have been caught in a feedback loop. Each winter reinforced the belief. Each disappearance deepened fear. Each fear-driven action increased danger, until the town hollowed itself out.
The final winter likely broke the cycle not by stopping it, but by completing it. When nearly everyone vanished, there was no one left to remember the ritual of waiting, fearing, and hoping for spring. Ravenscroft did not fall in a single night. It faded season by season. The land reclaimed it quietly. Today, nothing marks the site, no signpost, no memorial, only subtle undulations in the moor and the occasional artifact turned up by erosion. Historians still debate whether Ravenscroft was unique or simply the best documented example of a broader phenomenon. Britain has dozens of lost villages. Few show such seasonal precision. Ravenscroft remains different, a town not destroyed by invasion or disease, but undone by winter itself. Not all disappearances leave chaos. Some leave only silence. And that silence, preserved in records and absence, is what makes Ravenscroft one of the most unsettling places in British history.
By the time modern Britain began to take shape, Ravenscroft existed only as a shadow in documents and a warning in memory. Its absence became normalized. Roads bent around the moor. Property lines avoided it. What could not be explained was simply bypassed. In the early 20th century, a final attempt was made to study the site systematically. Archaeologists mapped the foundations, measured soil density, and documented every artifact. Their conclusion was careful and unsettling. Ravenscroft showed no signs of sudden catastrophe. No fire layer, no battle damage, no epidemic burial pits. Instead, it showed continuity interrupted by disappearance. The town did not die, it emptied. Researchers noted something else. The layout of Ravenscroft was unusual. Houses were clustered tightly, but paths leading outward all pointed toward the same stretch of moorland. This was not accidental. It suggested repeated movement in the same direction year after year. Winter movement. Chemical analysis of soil revealed elevated levels of methane and other gases beneath parts of the moor. In enclosed or low-lying areas, these gases can cause dizziness, confusion, loss of consciousness. In winter, when cold air traps gases close to the ground, exposure becomes more dangerous. This offered a grim possibility. People walking together at night, across frozen ground, through low-lying bogland, could lose awareness. A stumble, a collapse. One person falls, others try to help. The ground gives way. No screams, no struggle, just absence. Yet even this explanation does not fully resolve the mystery. Methane exposure would affect animals too, but Ravenscroft's livestock survived winters repeatedly. Sheep were found grazing in spring. Dogs remained. It was the people who vanished. The difference was movement. Animals stayed close. Humans walked out. Why walk out at night in winter? Church records offer a clue. In later years, Ravenscroft adopted unusual winter rituals, night prayers, processions, bells rung after dark. These practices were meant to ward off fear, but they also gathered people and sent them into the cold together. Fear reshaped custom. What began as prayer may have become movement. What began as vigilance may have led people into danger. Each winter reinforced the belief that safety required action. Staying still felt dangerous. Moving felt necessary. And so they moved. The final winter was not exceptional in conditions. It was exceptional in scale. Nearly everyone left at once. No staggered return. No survivors to re-anchor the town. The cycle ended because the community did. Later settlers sensed something wrong immediately. They reported unease not from ruins, but from expectation. The land felt watchful. Winters felt heavier. Silence felt deliberate. They left before winter tested them. Over centuries, Ravenscroft became a cautionary example without a name. Historians grouped it with other deserted medieval villages, but it never fit neatly. It was not abandoned for economic reasons. It was not destroyed by lordship changes. It did not relocate. It simply stopped retaining people. Today, the moor still behaves strangely. Snow melts unevenly. Sound travels oddly. Locals report ground that feels hollow beneath boots after frost.
These observations are not supernatural, they are geological. But geology does not erase fear, it explains it too late. Ravenscroft reminds history of something uncomfortable. Human disappearance does not require monsters or conspiracies. Sometimes it requires only environment, belief, and repetition. A town can train itself into vanishing. The people of Ravenscroft did not disappear all at once. They disappeared one winter at a time, until there was no one to notice the pattern. No memorial marks their end because there was no moment of ending. Only seasons, only cold, only silence. And that is why Ravenscroft remains one of Britain's most disturbing lost towns. Not because people vanished once, but because they vanished again and again, predictably, quietly, until disappearance became normal. A place where winter was not survived. It was endured, and eventually, it was obeyed. Long after Ravenscroft ceased to exist as a living town, its pattern continued to echo in places that shared its geography but not its name. Researchers studying settlement abandonment across Britain began to notice similarities. Remote communities near moorlands, bogs, and unstable ground showed higher winter mortality and unexplained disappearances. Ravenscroft was not unique, it was simply the clearest example. What set it apart was documentation. Most medieval villages left fragmentary records. Ravenscroft left a trail. Tax rolls thinning every winter, church books avoiding the word death, legal references to absence rather than destruction. It was history accidentally telling the truth. When modern mapping technologies were applied to the area in the late 20th century, something unsettling emerged. Seasonal satellite imagery showed subtle shifts in the land surface after frost. Lines appeared that were invisible in summer. Old paths briefly resurfaced under snow, revealing routes long forgotten. Nearly all of them pointed toward the same unstable zone beyond the former town boundary. This meant the townspeople were not wandering randomly, they were following a learned route, a ritualized path. One theory suggests that Ravenscroft developed a winter practice that became compulsory over time. Whether religious, social, or survival-based, it required people to leave the safety of their homes and move together into dangerous terrain. What began as tradition became obligation. Refusal may have been seen as worse than risk. Fear enforces obedience more effectively than authority. As winters worsened during the Little Ice Age, the risk increased. The ground weakened. Darkness lengthened. Each year, the practice claimed more lives, but tradition does not stop easily. Communities rarely abandon rituals that promise protection, even when those rituals cause harm. Eventually, the ritual consumed the entire town. No invasion could have done that. No plague could have been so selective. Only belief, reinforced by environment, could erase a population without leaving graves. The final silence of Ravenscroft was not sudden, it was earned through repetition. In modern Britain, similar mechanisms are studied under different names: group psychology, environmental risk amplification, cultural inertia. But Ravenscroft experienced them centuries before language existed to explain them. This is why the town resists neat explanation. It sits at the intersection of geology, climate, belief, and human behavior. Remove any one element and the pattern breaks. Together, they were lethal. Today, historians no longer ask what happened in a single winter. They ask what happens when fear becomes seasonal, when danger becomes expected, when survival itself becomes ritualized risk. Ravenscroft answers that question. It shows how communities can disappear without collapse, without violence, without trace. How people can walk willingly into danger because staying feels worse. The town was not cursed, it was conditioned. And that makes it far more disturbing, because conditioning does not require ancient moors or medieval darkness. It requires only repetition, fear, and the belief that there is no other choice. Ravenscroft vanished every winter until there was no one left to return. Not because it was forgotten, but because it remembered too well.